When the Democrats go to sleep at night and they fear one person, if I were to put top 3 names on that list, one of them is RFK today. Yeah.
When you listen to his interviews, and I wish people would, he rejects the prison of two ideas. He wants to move past the us versus them mentality. This is something that Biden had actually weaponized.
RFK going where Biden does not dare to tread.
You know, he's got quite a deep magnetic charisma and no shortage of courage. But
they'll say that Bobby Kennedy is spreading misinformation where everything he said you can verify. Everything he said is true. But
I like this guy. He's honest and he's friendly and he's kind.
We're going to do a mass experiment, a new kind of mass experiment of what happens when you tell people the truth and see what happens. My job is to tell people the truth, and if Americans have an appetite for that, that I will be president.
This is a time to bring America back together. We have been torn apart, and if anyone can bring it back together, it's the Kennedys.
I hope that what he can do is to break through by just being himself, being his honest self, very selfless, very focused on doing the right thing, and hopefully people will be able to see that. But we are absolutely up against a major media wall.
The reason people were having fights with their family is because the families were being lied to about information and believing some family members believed the lies, some did not. And that caused the polarization, and it amplifies the vitriol, and it poisons all of society when the government is lying, when the media is lying to you, when the trusted sources of information can no longer be trusted.
You know, it's really hard to tell how many people are awake and have, you know, how much this is exposed to the average American, because we're living in a sea of propaganda and censorship.
What's happened here today is that you have lifelong Republicans, lifelong independents, lifelong Democrats. It's time that we ended this schism. The people standing here today do not identify with any political party. We identify with unity, with health, with freedom. That's what's important about today.
My husband, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is going to come out and make a very important announcement. Are you ready for this?
The next President of the United States, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
My mission over the next 18 months of this campaign and throughout my presidency will be to end the corrupt merger of state and corporate power that is threatening now to impose a new kind of corporate feudalism in our country, to poison our children and our people with chemicals and pharmaceutical drugs, to strip mine our assets, to hollow out the middle class and keep us in a constant state of war. These lockdowns were a war on the poor, and they were a war on American children. There's been a systematic attack on our middle class, and the coup de grace was the lockdown. The lockdown was the biggest shift in wealth in human history. I don't want, the Democratic Party to be the party of fear and pharma and war and censorship. "55 years ago last month, I sat as a 14-year-old boy behind my father as he announced his campaign for presidency of the United States. And my father at that time was in many ways, the same position that I'm in today. He was running against a president of his own party. He was running against a war. He was running at a time of unprecedented polarization in our country. And he had no chance of winning. My father, when he declared, had not a single molecule in him that he believed that he could win the Democratic nomination. And the day he died, he won the California primary, the most urban state in this country, and the same day the South Dakota primary, the most rural. He had succeeded in uniting America. I was with my dad when he died in Los Angeles, and we brought him back to New York, and then we brought him from Penn Station in New York to Union Station in Washington, D.C. Normally that's a 2.5-hour train ride, and it took us 7.5 hours because there were 2 million people on the tracks. And that I will never forget as a 14-year-old boy what I saw from the windows of that train that day. In all of the urban train stations in Trenton and Newark and Philadelphia and Baltimore, they were crowded with black and white men singing the battle hymn of the Republic. God talks to human beings through many vectors, through each other, through organized religion, through the great books of those religions, through wise people, through art and music and literature and poetry, but nowhere with such detail and grace and color and joy as through creation. When we destroy a species, when we destroy a special place, we're diminishing our capacity to sense the divine, understand who God is, and what our own potential is as human beings. We deserve a president in this country who cares about these things and who talks about these things to the American people. My father, when he came back one time from the Delta, he said, we were all at the dinner table when he came in, and he said, I was in a tar paper shack today. It was smaller than this dining room, and there were 2 families living there, and the children get 1 meal a day. And when you get older, I want you to help those people. And when we would go into Southeast Washington or Appalachia, he would say to us, these are your people. These are Kennedy people. He said, the other people, the big shots, the corporations, the millionaires don't need the Kennedys. They have lobbyists, they have PR firms, they have lawyers. And he said, these are your people, and these are the people you need to spend your life helping. And when I'm president, I'm going to be president for those people. We're going to really take back this country. You give me a piece of ground and a sword, and I am going to take back this country with your help, the help of all the homeless Republicans and Democrats and independents who are Americans first. Thank you all very much.
Everybody in this country, everybody in this room, were told things that turned out to be absolutely false. If you take the vaccine, you're never going to get COVID. You take the vaccine, you're not going to infect other people.
I'm going to talk about lockdowns. We created a billionaire a day, and this was Trump and Biden. Of 500 days of lockdowns, we moved $4 trillion from the American middle class to the super rich. The people who came into the lockdown with $1 billion increased their wealth on average by 30%.
One of the things that happened is we created this terrible precedent where the government has shown that people are willing to comply when it violates the Constitution. And we did this with free expression. We did, they closed the churches for a year with no due process, no just compensation, no scientific citations ever. They never showed us a scientific citation that said this works, and they've all admitted that now. Everybody's admitted in the government that these were not science-based, and you had just one unelected bureaucrat who's been there for 50 years, never won an election, who says that 1 week masks don't work, honestly, said it privately and publicly, and then a month later, everybody put them on, and then a week after that, put 2 on.
We closed 3.3 million businesses. 41% of black-owned businesses in this country that closed down will never reopen. And what all the orthodox protocols said is that you quarantine the sick, you protect the vulnerable, and that you let the population continue, because when you shut down businesses, that kills people. Unemployment kills people.
What you're saying is very true.
Teachers for Choice has endorsed Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be the next president of the United States.
I believe that RFK Jr. would be a great candidate for the president of the United States because of the values that he holds, and he sees himself as his father and his uncle were, and that is what we need back, more traditional values in terms of our fundamental rights, because all that has been eroded in the last 3 years.
I'm going to tell you right now, I'm about halfway done with this speech. And this is what happens when you censor somebody for 18 years. This is a letter that many of you signed, many of my fellow Democrats. I've spent my life in this party. I've devoted my life to the values of this party. 102 people signed this. This itself is evidence of the problem that this hearing was convened to address. This is an attempt to censor a censorship hearing.
Censorship, we all know that it's wrong, that there's never been a time in history when the good guys have been the ones who are censoring people. And so Americans know, innately that that the government is not supposed to censor us. And yet we put up with it. Censorship is antithetical to our party. It was appalling to my father, to my uncle, to FDR, to Harry Truman, Thomas Jefferson. We now have clear evidence that there were White House personnel who were ordering the social media companies to censor me, and it had nothing to do with misinformation. As I was the first person who was censored by the Biden administration, 37 hours after President Biden took the oath of office, White House officials were in contact with high-level, top-level White House officials with Twitter and Facebook, asking them to take down my accounts.
They had to invent a new word called malinformation to censor people like me. Malinformation is information that is true, but is inconvenient to the government. There was no misinformation on my Instagram account. Everything I put on that account was cited and sourced to peer-reviewed publications or government databases. Nobody has ever pointed to a single piece of misinformation that I publish.
You think Joe Biden's a good man?
I've known him for 40 years, and I've always thought of him as somebody who was compassionate, who cared about this country. I haven't seen much of him in the past since he was elected.
Neither have we. Do you think he has strong character? You saw how he reacted in Maui.
I don't think I can shed any light on it. People can look at him and make up their own minds.
Do you think he's a healthy guy?
This job requires a lot of people to be in good shape. If he feels that he's up to that he should debate me.
When I reread the Fauci book, I couldn't understand how a man like that was so effective. It doesn't strike me as a particularly charismatic guy. Maybe he's charismatic behind it. But where does he get the source of so much power?
The individuals who are reliably in the tank with the industry, who are carrying water for them, people like Anthony Fauci, are people who rise inexorably to the top and then remain there for generations. So, you know, here you have a public official who's been there for 50 years, the highest paid official in the United States government, much higher paid than the President of the United States. And he's there for one reason, because he knows how to serve agency ambition. He's taken that agency that was the gold standard for scientific research and essentially abandoned the mission of trying to figure out why are Americans so sick, and adopted instead a new mission, which is to develop, to be an incubator for pharmaceutical drugs for the agency. And when it develops those drugs at NIH and then farms them out to a pharma company, it gets to collect royalties. So NIH is collecting billions of dollars on the Moderna vaccine, which they developed. And people who work for Tony Fauci, 4 to 6 individuals who work for him, have march-in rights for those patents, so that they will collect now $150,000 a year for life, and their children and heirs will collect that money as long as that vaccine is being sold. Oh, you have an agency where that has these commercial, benefits that have overwhelmed their regulatory functions. And if you're going to get $150,000 a year for life, and you're the regulator, do you think you're really going to be regulating, or are you going to be promoting?
We are thrilled at the possibility, at the probability of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. becoming the next president of the United States. He will reunite the country. We are so divided since 2015. We've had so many issues breaking everybody apart. We need someone who's going to unify us together. I'm a lifelong registered Democrat. Robert Kennedy gets the nod. I will absolutely vote for him.
What do you say to people who say you're just a Democrat in name only?
I say, show me one issue that I am different on than my father, Robert Kennedy, my uncle, John Kennedy. You go through every issue that they believed in and check the box. And that's where I am. I mean, the Democratic Party has changed a lot. I would say I'm the last Democrat.
Do you feel in some ways that what you're doing is a continuation of what your father never got to do?
Well, I feel like I'm representing the same kind of values. My worldview is almost completely consistent with my father and uncle's worldview. The Democratic Party used to be anti-war. It used to be skeptical of the military-industrial complex. I mean, Martin Luther King, died as a peace activist. My father died as a peace activist. My uncle John Kennedy was killed as a peace activist. We were the party that was skeptical that we should have these continuous wars all the time. We were the party that was against censorship. Now we're the party of censorship. I'm pro-choice in every way, whether it's any medical intervention, whether it's, medicines, or whether it's abortion. So, show me where I departed from the Democratic Party. You won't be able to. And, people have said to me, why don't you run as an independent? And I say, because I'm a Democrat. This is who I am. This is my identity, but I want my party back.
Hi, I'm Dr. Pierre Corey, and I'm speaking to you today to endorse Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for the presidency of the United States. I'm a board-certified internist, pulmonologist, and ICU specialist. And throughout all of my work in COVID, studying various aspects of therapeutics, and from being an advocate in the medical freedom movement, I've gotten to know Bobby Kennedy and his work. If you're anything like me, what I knew about Bobby 3 years ago was generally negative, as that's how he's been consistently portrayed over the last 2 decades in media and any public discussions. But what I've seen him do, and the work that his organization, Children's Health Defense, has done, where they have literally invested millions of dollars into court cases protecting school teachers and firefighters and policemen and physicians and nurses and anyone who's lost their livelihoods over these illogical vaccine mandates. Well, they've been there to protect us. And then when I learned about Bobby and his career doing the same, standing up for the common man, litigating against corporate and governmental bad actors on issues affecting the environment and our health, he's a deeply morally committed man, and his experience informs the policies that he plans to enact when he gets into government. And I will say there's never been more of a time in history that we've needed a man like Bobby Kennedy. He has a deep knowledge, and he's very data-driven on all the dysfunction that's occurring in our government right now, which is largely acting under the influence of corporate interests. And his plans to take back our government and put it back into the hands of people is the only thing that I can get behind. I mean, he's the only candidate right now who's speaking about the humanitarian catastrophe, which is the chronic illness rates in American children. I'm the father where 2 of my 3 daughters have chronic illnesses. And in the last 30 years, chronic illness has exploded to now where over half of American children have a chronic illness. No one is talking about this. And his plans to research and reverse the number of causes that are creating this catastrophe is something that is so sorely needed. And for that reason, I'm supporting Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for president. Vote Kennedy 2024.
If I have not significantly dropped the level of chronic disease in our children by the end of my first term, I do not want you to re-elect me. We have the sickest generation in American history. We have the sickest children on earth in this country. We spend more on healthcare by far than any other country, and we have the worst health outcomes. We spend $4.3 trillion annually on health, and about 84% of that goes to treating chronic disease. Now, why is that? Because America has the highest chronic disease burden in the world. We didn't always. In 1940s, 50s, and 60s, we had a really healthy population. We had only 6% of our citizens or children had chronic disease. By 2006, it was 54%. And by chronic disease, what do I mean? I mean obesity, neurological diseases, neurodevelopmental, ADD, ADHD, speech delay, language delay, tics, Tourette's syndrome, ASD, and autism. Autism went from 1 in every 10,000 in my generation to 1 in every 34 kids today. This epidemic is real. It is not the result of changing diagnostic criteria. It is not the result of better recognition. It is an epidemic. And why aren't we asking the question? What happened? This is crippling to the middle class in this country. And we need to figure out what it is. And I can tell you this. When I am the President of the United States, I am going to end the chronic disease epidemic in this country. And if I have not significantly dropped the level of chronic disease in our children by the end of my first term, I do not want you to re-elect me.
He's trying very hard, and he's even trying not to say anything bad about Biden, which is nearly impossible. But I think he wants to have a different tone to his campaign, which is badly needed.
I'm very, very grateful to all of you for coming. There are other members of my family who are not here today. I'm going to make a confession because I know most American families, they never have any differences with each other. When one does, it's... You know, my family was raised, we're weak, and my father and my father's father, my grandfather, Joe Kennedy, did the same thing. Every night there's 11 of us. We come home and we talk about what we're going to argue about over the dinner table. And people take different sides and we argue about it. And we fight about stuff. But we all love each other. And my family, 5 of them work for the Biden administration.
Since announcing your campaign, your brothers, sisters, and wider family have said that they're not supporting you. They're supporting President Biden. How does that feel?
Well, some of them. I had 2 of my siblings at my announcement who support me, and I think I have a couple of others who are genuinely supportive. But yeah, there's people in my family who disagree with me on stuff.
Many of my family members are working in the administration. Many of them also just plain disagree with me on issues like censorship, on war, on public health, and they are entitled to their beliefs, and I respect their opinions on them, and I love them back.
You know, I really feel like right now what our nation lacks is unity. I feel like Kennedy, what he's going to do is he's going to unify the nation. Some of his ideas are of traditional fiscal conservative people, and some are democratic ideas. So it's the good of both, the good of the Republican Party, the good of the Democrat Party, and that's what we need. You know, what's something else that I really like about Kennedy is he carries on the last name Kennedy. I remember President Kennedy said, "Ask not what America can do for you, but ask what you can do for America." The age that RFK Jr. is at and everything, like he is very successful, went to Harvard and everything, he does not need to do this, but he is doing this to serve America. He's a true leader. That's what we need right now.
One of the things that I've done over the past 30 years as an environmental advocate is to constantly go around and confront this argument that an investment in our environment is a diminishment of our nation's wealth. It doesn't diminish our wealth.
There's a strong drive in our society to not think about the future, to use up resources right now. Good environmental policy, 100% of the time, is good economic policy.
Good environmental policy is identical to good economic policy.
And what we're fighting against is this impulse that says we're going to treat the planet as if it were a business in liquidation. We're going to convert all of our natural resources to cash. We're going to have a few years of pollution-based prosperity, and we're going to generate this illusion of a lot of cash and a lot of prosperity. But in the long run, we're going to have to pay for that with denuded environments, with toxic cleanup costs that we simply can't afford.
If we want to meet our obligation as a generation, as a civilization, as a nation, which is to create communities for our children that provide them with the same opportunities for dignity and enrichment and prosperity and good health as the communities that our parents gave us, we've got to start by protecting our environmental infrastructure, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the wildlife, the fisheries, the public lands, those things that are not reducible to private property, but by their nature are the property of all of us, the commons, the commonwealth, the public trust assets, the landscapes, the waterways that connect us to the 10,000 generations of human beings that lived before there were laptops, and that ultimately connect us to God.
How do you feel about the fact that the president is having Democrat prosecutors arrest his political opponent?
I've been very disciplined about not commenting on the legal proceedings on either side because, you know, anything I say is going to be seen as political.
So you're going to dodge the question?
Yeah, exactly.
So we have money for wars, and we have money for bankers that need bailouts. Well, what happens to the American people when they are on hard times? Shouldn't we have compassion for them?
I'm seeing things in this country that I never believed that I would see in the United States. People living in a level of desperation. The average wage in this country is now $5,000 less than the cost of basic goods, of food, transportation, and housing. So half of Americans are making up that gap by putting it on their credit card bills. And this week, we passed $1.1 trillion in credit card debt. And those families are paying 22% on that debt. If the mafia did that, it would be called loan sharking. But for these banks and credit card companies, it's just business as usual. And who owns virtually all of those banks and credit card companies? BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. home ownership, which was the central promise of the American dream was if you worked hard, if you played by the rules, you could pay a mortgage, you could get your own home, you could have a summer vacation, you could, take care of your family, and then you'd have money left over for retirement on one job. That was the dream, and that was the actual reality for people who are my age. But for my kids' age, that is just a fantasy. The price of single-family homes in the last 2 years has gone from $200,000 to $215,000 2 years ago to $400,000 a day, and the interest rates have gone from 1% to 7%. So that home is now cost 10 times what it did 2 years ago. And even 2 years ago, it was out of reach for a lot of these kids. And why is that happening? One is the inflation from all of the wars, the lost wars that we financed over the past 20 years, $8 trillion that we printed, $16 trillion we printed to fund the pandemic lockdowns. So that's $24 trillion that is fueling this runaway inflation that is driving up the cost of food, of healthcare, of childcare, of housing. But the real culprit are these giant companies, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, which all own each other. So it's really one giant corporation. And now they've targeted all the single-family homes in America that they want to buy. And if they stay on the current trajectory, they will own 60% of the single-family homes by 2030. People in this country are choosing between food and gasoline and food and medicine. And they're listening to a little baby crying in the room next door, young couples, and have to wonder whether that baby is $50 sick or $100 sick or $500 or $1,500 sick before they bring them to a hospital. And you have all these Americans now who are living hand to mouth, and they do not feel that anybody is listening to them in the political process. They feel they've been completely abandoned by the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and that those parties are now serving elites. "60 years ago, this month, my uncle John F. Kennedy made an historic a speech at American University in Washington, D.C. With the speech, he did something extraordinary, something that had never been done before. To me, it's his most important speech. It's one of the most important speeches in American history. And the thing that he did that was so unusual in that speech is he talked to the American people and asked them to put themselves in the shoes of the Russians.
But I also believe that we must re-examine our own attitudes as individuals and as a nation, for our attitude is as essential as theirs. And every graduate of this school, every thoughtful citizen who despairs of war and wishes to bring peace should begin by looking inward.
And at that time, most Americans, the zeitgeist of that era, I was born 9 years after the end of World War II, and the zeitgeist of our era, the governing assumption was that America had won the war, and now we were going to rightfully dominate the peace. And he said something very, very different than to Americans that challenged that sort of patriotic assumption. He said, no, it was actually the Russians who won the war. They weakened Hitler and made it possible for us to march into Berlin. And he talked about the suffering of the Russians during the war.
And no nation in the history of battle ever suffered more than the Soviet Union in the Second World War. At least 20 million lost their lives. Countless millions of homes and families were burned or sacked. A third of the nation's territory, including 2/3 of its industrial base, was turned into a wasteland.
He asked Americans to imagine that all of the land, all of the cities, all of the towns from the East Coast to Chicago had been leveled to rubble, that the forests and fields had been burned. And he said, that's what happened to Russia during the war. That's what they sacrificed for us. You know, we were sold this war as that it was a humanitarian effort. My son went over there and fought. My son was a machine gunner for a special forces unit in the Kharkiv offensive. So I have a great sympathy for the Ukrainian people. This is not good for the Ukrainian people. This is a proxy war between the United States and Russia that Ukraine is being sacrificed in. It is a sacrifice zone. In 2019, France, Germany, and Russia all agreed to the Minsk Accords. That year, Zelensky ran for president. He was a comedian. He had no political experience. Why did he win? Because he ran on one issue, signing the Minsk Accords. As soon as he got in there, Victoria Nuland in the White House told him he couldn't do it. Then Putin sends 40,000 troops in. That's not enough to conquer the country. Clearly, he wanted us to come to the negotiation. He wanted somebody to come to a negotiating table. Zelensky came to the negotiating table, signed a new agreement that was the Minsk Accords 2 in 2022, and that would have allowed Donbass to stay, and Lugansk to remain as part of Ukraine. Putin signed it, Zelensky initialed it, and Putin, in good faith, began withdrawing troops from the Ukraine. What happened? We sent Boris Johnson over there to torpedo it, because we don't want peace we want the war with Russia. We promised in 1992, the Russian leadership said, we will move, this was Gorbachev, said when the Soviet Union, he was getting ready to dismantle the Soviet Union, and he said, we're going to withdraw 400,000 troops from East Germany. And we're going to allow you to reunite Germany under NATO, which is a hostile army. That's a huge concession for them. The one commitment that we want, is what the Russians said, is that you will not move NATO to the east. James Baker, who was then Secretary of State under Bush, famously promised, we will not move NATO 1 inch to the east. Well, since then, we've moved it 1,000 miles in 14 countries. Now, when we started that plan in 1997, Bill Perry, who was the Secretary of Defense under Clinton, said to the Clinton administration, if you move NATO to the east, I'm resigning because you are forcing the Russians to come to war with us. George Kennan, who's the most important diplomat in American history, the architect of the containment policy during World War II, said the same thing. You do not need to make an enemy out of Russia.
I have therefore chosen this time and place to discuss a topic on which ignorance too often abounds and the truth too rarely perceived, and that is the most important topic on earth, peace. What kind of a peace do I mean, and what kind of a peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana, enforced on the world by American weapons of war, not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I am talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace in all time.
Do you want a man for president who's seasoned through and through, but not so doggone seasoned that he won't try something new? A man who's old enough to know and young enough to do. Well, it's up to you, it's up to you. It's strictly up to you. But it's Kennedy, 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 Kennedy for me. Kennedy, 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 Kennedy. Do you want a man with spirit who is not afraid to fight?
A man whose record shows that he will fight for what is right.
A loyal man who'll bring the job a fresh new point of view. Well, it's up to you, it's up to you. It's strictly up to you. 'Cause it's Kennedy, 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 Kennedy for me. Kennedy, 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 Kennedy. And do you deny to any man the right he's guaranteed to be elected president no matter what his creed?
It's promised in the Bill of Rights to which we must be true.
So it's up to you, it's up to you. It's strictly up to you. And it's Kennedy, 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 Kennedy for me. Kennedy, 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 Kennedy. Do you like a man who answers straight, a man who's always fair? We'll measure him against the others, and when you compare, you'll cast your vote for Kennedy and a change that's overdue. So it's up to you, it's up to you, it's strictly up to you. Yes, it's Kennedy, 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 Kennedy for me.